Okay, so buckle up, because today we're going to be diving into WeaveVM.
Sounds like fun.
You bet. And you sent me, a whole stack of stuff to go through.
Oh, yeah.
Articles, blog posts, documentation, even some code snippets. You really went deep on this one.
Well, it seems like you're really getting into the whole world of decentralized storage and how it all works with those EVM networks that everybody knows.
Yeah, exactly. WeaveVM is trying to solve some really big problems,
It
like
is.
how blockchains deal with data.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm always fascinated by projects that are like trying to crack the EVM storage dilemma,
Yeah.
those high gas fees and the fact that most NFTs aren't really on chain. Those are huge problems, right?
Yeah, they're definitely huge roadblocks. For developers and users alike, it's a real problem.
Exactly. So could WeaveVM be the answer? I guess that's what we're here to figure out.
That's the mission for this deep dive, yeah. We need to understand what WeaveVM is, what makes it different, and then ultimately what it could mean for the future of all these dApps out there.
I'm in. So let's start with the basics. What exactly is WeaveVM?
So WeaveVM is what we call a sovereign EVM layer 1 network. So it's its own blockchain, right? But it's built on the same tech that Ethereum uses.
Okay.
But here's the thing. It's laser focused on cracking that problem of expensive on-chain storage and making computation cheaper.
Makes sense. Now, I keep seeing Arweave mentioned over and over in this stuff. What's the connection there?
Ah, yeah, Arweave. It's like WeaveVM's secret weapon. Think of it like, a massive hard drive, but, it's decentralized.
Okay.
And it's specifically made for storing data permanently. That's Arweave in a nutshell. And WeaveVM uses it as its storage layer.
So that's how they make it so much cheaper to store data compared to Ethereum.
Yeah, and even cheaper than some of those layer 2 solutions out there.
So how much cheaper are we talking about here? Like, give me some numbers.
Okay, so we're talking a huge difference. Storing data on WeaveVM is going to cost you something like 0.505 per megabyte. Now compare that to Ethereum, where it's a whopping $450 per megabyte. I mean, come on. For developers who need to store tons of data on chain, it's a no-brainer.
Wow, that's a pretty big difference.
It is.
Okay, so they're using Arweave for cheap and permanent storage. That much I get.
Right.
But how does it all actually work? How do they make it so efficient?
Well, they've got a few tricks up their sleeve. First, they use something called Borsch serialization,
Okay.
which basically just strips out all the unnecessary data, makes it leaner. And then on top of that, they use Brotli compression.
So they're like super compressing everything before it even gets to Arweave.
Exactly. It's like packing a suitcase, but like really efficiently.
Smart. But with all this fancy tech stuff going on behind the scenes, doesn't that mean developers need to learn like a whole new set of tools to work with WeaveVM?
Well, that's the cool part. All that complex stuff is happening under the hood, but they've made sure that developers can still work with the tools they're used to. Smart contracts can read and write data directly to Arweave through WeaveVM, and they can do it all using that EVM interface that they already know.
So it's developer friendly, it's incredibly cheap for storage, and they've got the permanence of Arweave on their side. Anything else that makes WeaveVM stand out from all the other blockchains out there?
Yeah, actually, they're going for what they call hyperscalability.
Okay.
So in plain English, that just means they want really high throughput. Right now on their testnet, they're hitting something like 62 millibeats per second in data throughput.
Wow.
And they're aiming for over 125 millibeats per second on mainnet.
Hold on. 125 millibeats per second. That's a crazy amount of data.
It is. And get this, because they're using Arweave, every single block gets permanently stored, like etched into their history, creates a complete and verifiable record of every single transaction.
So transparent, tamper-proof.
Yep.
It's like having a digital notary public watching over everything.
I like it. Now, I'm also seeing a lot about precompiles in this documentation. Something about them being the first of their kind.
Oh, yeah, the precompiles, they're like shortcuts built into the EVM to make certain things run super fast and smooth. WeaveVM has these brand new precompiles that let Solidity smart contracts talk directly to Arweave, like a two-way street.
So no more workarounds. Developers can just tap right into Arweave storage from their Solidity code.
Exactly. Makes building those complex dApps a whole lot easier.
Wow, there's a lot of really cool tech going on here. But is this all just theoretical? Are there any actual projects using WeaveVM right now?
Oh, yeah, it's already being used, even though it's, still pretty early days. But chains like Metis, RSS3, and Say are all using WeaveVM for archiving their ledgers permanently.
So like a backup system, but decentralized.
Exactly. They're using it as a decentralized, always-on backup for their entire blockchain history. Super important, especially now with all the worries about centralization. Right, right. Decentralized and permanent, that's the way to go for transparency and security.
Couldn't agree more. And honestly, we're just scratching the surface here. Think about like all those dApps that rely on tons of content. Like imagine a decentralized social media where all your posts, all the pictures, videos, everything is permanently stored on Arweave. Or games where players actually own all their in-game stuff and it's all managed on-chain.
It's like the promise of NFTs finally being fulfilled. No more centralized servers going down and wiping out your digital assets.
That's the idea. And it goes way beyond just NFTs, too. WeaveVM could even be the high-throughput data layer for layer 2s, or maybe even the base layer, the L0, that other EVM chains can build on top of, providing that solid foundation for settling data and storing it. There's so much potential here.
We've covered a lot already, and it's clear that WeaveVM wants to be way more than just another blockchain. They're aiming to be like a core piece of the internet's infrastructure. But before we get ahead of ourselves, who's the team behind all this? What's their story?
So, it's being developed by Decent Land Labs, a team with a pretty solid track record. They've built some successful Web3 products already, like Arc Protocol, Namespace, and that Molecular Execution Machine, or MEM for short.
And they've got some big names backing them, right?
Oh, yeah. Investors like Duales Capital, Big Brain Holdings, Long Hash Ventures, they're all in, which shows a lot of confidence in what WeaveVM's trying to do. Plus, they're actively working with other projects in both the Arweave and EVM ecosystems, which is really smart for building that strong foundation for growth.
It's interesting how WeaveVM has changed over time. I remember reading that they started with this idea of a lazy evaluated EVM bytecode machine running on top of Arweave.
Yeah,
But
then they made a pretty big shift, right? Decided to build a full-fledged network using Rapith, Paradigm's Ethereum client. Quite a change.
it's a big pivot. What made them do that?
Seems like they realized that building a whole network, instead of just a protocol, would make things way easier for developers, And it would make WeaveVM compatible with all the existing Ethereum tools, which could bring in a much bigger developer community.
Smart move. That lower barrier to entry is crucial for getting more people on board.
Definitely. It shows that they're thinking about the bigger picture and not just building something in isolation. They get it.
Yeah, they're really prioritizing the developer experience,
Mhm.
and that's key for getting adoption.
Absolutely. And speaking of smooth transitions, their approach to archiving those ledgers is pretty elegant.
It is. I mean, a lot of EVM chains have trouble storing their entire history on chain because it just costs too much and it gets really complicated,
Yeah.
especially as more and more transactions happen.
Totally. It becomes a real headache, but WeaveVM has figured out a way to use Arweave for permanent ledger archiving that's both cost-effective and doesn't require a ton of resources.
Okay, so how does that work?
So every block they create on WeaveVM gets basically turned into a smaller package using something called Borscht serialization. Then they compress it even more with Brotli. And finally, the super efficient package gets stored permanently on Arweave.
So it's like a super organized digital archive for the entire blockchain history, and anyone can access it through WeaveVM.
Exactly. They even made an archiving tool that makes it super easy to push a chain's entire history to WeaveVM and Arweave. In fact, they use this tool themselves to archive all the data from their own AlphaNet v1 testnet.
That's impressive. They're leading by example. So any chain, no matter what it's for or how it's built, can use WeaveVM to create a permanent and trustworthy record of everything it does.
Precisely. It's like building a giant library of blockchain history. And
Right.
speaking of breaking down barriers, one of the most exciting things about WeaveVM is how it brings together both EVM and SmartWeave contracts.
Yeah, bridging those two worlds. How do they make that happen?
So they came up with this new Ethereum standard called ERC 7689, which they call Smart Blobs. And basically what it does is it lets developers run SmartWeave contracts, which are usually written in stuff like JavaScript or Python, and are native to Arweave right inside an EVM environment.
Wait, so the developers can code in whatever language they prefer and still have it all work with EVM chains through WeaveVM. That's incredible.
Exactly. It opens up a ton of new possibilities. Developers get to choose what they're comfortable with, but they can still tap into that massive EVM ecosystem.
It really feels like a new era for blockchain development. I mean, we're talking about combining the power of the EVM with the affordability and permanence of Arweave, all while being accessible to a wider range of developers.
It's a pretty compelling vision for sure.
It is. Now, we talked about those red execution extensions, or XXs, earlier.
Mm.
They seem super important for all of this. Just a reminder, what are they again, and how is WeaveVM using them?
Think of XX as like, well, powerful add-ons for the Wrath client, but without messing with its core code. It's like giving an already powerful engine like superpowers.
I like it. Give me some examples. What kind of superpowers are we talking about here?
Well, they've got XXs that handle transferring data to Arweave for permanent storage, others that take care of serializing and compressing that data, and some that manage that integration with MEM. They even open sourced this whole directory of ref XXs called exext.rs to get other developers using them.
So they're not just building a platform, they're creating a whole ecosystem of tools and resources for developers. That's a fantastic way to encourage innovation.
Totally. They're leading the way, showing what's possible, and then helping others build on top of that. It's very cool.
Let's dig into some of these XXs. I'm really curious about the one that sends data to Google BigQuery. Seems kind of strange for a decentralized system, right?
It is a bit unusual. What they're doing is using BigQuery as a middle step before sending data to Arweave. The XX grabs data from the WeaveVM node, shoots it over to BigQuery for indexing, and then uses Iris to get it all onto Arweave for permanent storage.
So it's like using BigQuery as a staging area to get everything organized,
Right.
But why not just go straight to Arweave? Isn't BigQuery centralized?
It's all about using the right tools for the job. BigQuery is amazing at managing and indexing massive amounts of data, which is exactly what a network like WeaveVM needs.
Makes sense.
And even though, yeah, it's centralized, it's just a temporary stop on the way to Arweave where everything gets stored permanently in a decentralized and tamper-proof way.
Got it. So it's a practical approach.
Yeah.
Using the best tool for the job while still keeping things decentralized in the long run. Okay, I'm with you. Now, didn't they also create an XX specifically for data availability?
Yep. They call it the dApps. And it's a brand new way to ensure data availability for EVM accumulators without having to change anything about the sequencer, which is the part that puts transactions in order.
So it's basically a plug-and-play module that any Reth-based chain can use to get WeaveVM's data availability features.
Exactly. And it's super easy to integrate. They designed it so that it can be added to any Reth client with like 80 lines of code.
Wow. They're really making it simple for developers to supercharge their chains with WeaveVM.
That's the power of modular design and open source. It lets these new technologies spread quickly.
Totally. And what if that Borscht serializer XX, what does that one do again?
That one's all about efficiency. It basically takes the block data and puts it into this really compact binary format called Borscht.
Okay, but why is that such a big deal?
It's all about minimizing the amount of data they need to store on Arweave. Using Borscht, they can slash storage costs and make the whole network run faster.
So it's like compressing a file to make it easier to send and store.
Precisely. Every little bit of optimization helps when you're building a high-throughput blockchain that's handling tons of data.
It's clear they've put a ton of thought into optimizing everything, like a well-oiled machine.
Exactly. They've really thought about every single layer of the system to make sure it all works in perfect harmony.
And the goal is to offer like a really affordable, permanent, and accessible way to store data for the entire blockchain ecosystem.
You got it. And they're not stopping there. They've also built some powerful tools and protocols on top of all this, like that WVM data protocol.
Oh, yeah, the WVM protocol. What can you tell me about that one?
So that one's all about making it easy for anyone, no matter how tech savvy they are, to access the data stored on WeaveVM. It's like a universal language for getting to that data, whether it's directly from WeaveVM itself or from layer 2 solutions that are using WeaveVM.
So anyone can tap into all that data without having to be a coding wizard.
Precisely. It's like a universal API. And the best part is, it's trustless. You don't need to rely on some centralized server to get the data. It's all directly accessible through the decentralized network.
That's essential for a truly decentralized system, for sure. But how does it work? How do they make it so simple?
Well, it uses WeaveVM's data availability layer and Arweave's permanent storage to create this really reliable way to get to transaction data. They've got special endpoints for grabbing different types of data, like transaction call data, which is like the instructions that get sent to a smart contract when it runs.
It's like they've already written the queries for you.
You got it. And it's all publicly available. You could even test it out yourself with simple tools like curl. They've even published benchmarks showing just how speedy this thing is.
Wow, so it's fast, efficient, easy to use, and totally decentralized. They've really thought of everything.
They have. They're really focused on making the developer experience as smooth as possible. But, WeaveVM isn't just about building in isolation. They're also working with a bunch of other projects in the Arweave and EVM space. They've got some really interesting partnerships going on.
Yeah, they're all about collaboration. I know they've teamed up with SETA, that decentralized data transport layer.
Hmm.
We've mentioned them before, but I'd love to learn more about how they're working with WeaveVM. What's the scoop there?
So WeaveVM is using SETA in a really smart way. They're using it to power their storage price oracles and to provide on-chain access to these huge, constantly updating data sets.
Storage price oracles. Tell me more about those.
Well, WeaveVM already has super cheap data storage, right? But to make things even more robust and dynamic, they need a way to keep track of how much it actually costs to store data in the real world.
Because those costs can change over time.
Exactly. And they need to make sure their pricing stays competitive and reflects the actual costs.
Makes sense.
So using SETA's programmable oracles, they can get real-time data on the prices of physical hard drives. And then they use this data to figure out how much to charge for storage on their hot cache layer, which they're working on.
Oh, right. The hot cache. That's designed to give, super fast data access for apps that need it.
Yep. It's a great example of how they're using existing infrastructure and working with experts to build a more complete ecosystem.
And you mentioned using SETA to access large data sets, too. How does that fit into all of this?
So WeaveVM wants to be the next-gen storage layer for EVM chains, right?
Right.
But they know that not every application needs to store tons of data directly on-chain. Sometimes you need to access and process data that's stored off-chain.
So it's about giving developers more flexibility and options for how they manage their data.
Exactly. SETA lets developers decide exactly what data they need, where to get it from, and how they want it formatted, all within these programmable oracles.
So it's like creating a custom data pipeline for each application.
You got it. And SETA acts as the middleman, fetching the data and delivering it to the WeaveVM network. It's a really clever solution to a common problem in blockchain, managing big data sets without sacrificing speed or efficiency.
It's about finding that perfect balance. And it sounds like SETA's intent-centric Oracle model is what makes it all possible.
Absolutely. Traditional Oracle models just aren't flexible enough to handle this kind of thing. But SETA's programmable oracles give developers way more control over their data pipelines. They just say what they need, and SETA takes care of the rest.
It's a win-win. But their collaborations don't stop with SETA, do they?
Yeah.
I know they've also been working closely with MEM and AO.
That's right. Both of those, MEM, which is short for the Molecular Execution Machine, and AO, which is this really interesting actor-oriented computing system, are built on Arweave.
So WeaveVM is building connections between the Ethereum world and the whole Arweave ecosystem.
Exactly. They're creating this interconnected landscape where different technologies can work together.
I like it.
They've even created something called LSHAO, which is a bridge between EVM and AO. Basically, it sends a constant stream of EVM data into an AO process so the two systems can talk to each other seamlessly.
Wow, so data from WeaveVM can trigger things in AO applications and vice versa. That opens up a ton of possibilities.
It does. It's like connecting different parts of a decentralized brain. Imagine the possibilities of combining the power of AO with the security and familiarity of the EVM, and then having it all backed up by Arweave's permanent storage.
That's a lot of power. And it really highlights WeaveVM's goal to be more than just a storage layer. They're trying to create a central hub for all these decentralized applications.
Precisely. And they're not just focusing on new stuff either. They're using WeaveVM to make existing projects even better, like their partnership with Metis.
Oh yeah, they're a layer 2 scaling solution for Ethereum, right? How does WeaveVM fit into their plans?
So Metis teamed up with WeaveVM to make sure that their ledger data is always available. Basically, WeaveVM is acting as a decentralized archival node for Metis, storing a complete copy of their blockchain on Arweave. It's like having a tamper-proof backup system for their entire history.
So even if something catastrophic happened to the Metis network, their history would still be safe and sound on Arweave, accessible through WeaveVM. That's a huge deal for their credibility.
Absolutely. And it really shows the value of WeaveVM. They're not just about shiny new things. They're about making the blockchain infrastructure we already have more secure and transparent and, resistant to problems.
It's like they're building the foundation for a truly decentralized and resilient internet, one block at a time.
I like that. A foundation. That's a great way to put it. And they're not limiting themselves to just EVM chains. They're also looking at integrations with SVM chains, those chains that use the Solana virtual machine.
Really? So they're branching out from the Ethereum world.
Yeah. They just launched Weave SVM, a project that lets developers build a WeaveVM Layer 2 that uses the SVM for computation but still settles data on WeaveVM.
So Solana-based dApps could benefit from WeaveVM's permanent storage and data availability. That's huge.
It is. It's a really ambitious project that could bring a lot more users to WeaveVM and make it even more useful for all kinds of developers and projects.
They're thinking big, that's for sure.
Definitely. And they're not afraid to take risks, like their work with Humanoid.
Humanoid, that's the project that uses biometrics to prevent Sybil attacks, right? How is WeaveVM involved in that?
Well, Humanoid wants to make sure that every user is a real, unique human being, and WeaveVM's permanent storage could help them synchronize their network way faster.
So new nodes could join the network more quickly because they wouldn't have to download the entire blockchain from scratch.
Exactly. They could just use the data that's already stored on WeaveVM.
Makes sense. That would make a big difference in terms of efficiency and accessibility.
Totally. It would save a lot of time and resources for anyone who wants to join the Humanoid network. It's a perfect example of how WeaveVM's tech can be used to solve real problems, not just in the EVM world, but across all kinds of blockchains.
It's amazing how their vision keeps expanding. It's like they're pushing the boundaries of what we thought was possible with blockchain. But before we get too far ahead, let's circle back to those precompiles for a second. They're a total game changer for how we interact with Arweave, aren't they?
Absolutely. They're the key to making EVM smart contracts work directly and easily with the Arweave network. No more middlemen, no more hassle.
Give me a quick recap. What are precompiles and how do they work?
So they're basically like pre-written bits of code that live inside the EVM. They're super optimized for specific tasks that would normally be way too expensive or complex for regular smart contracts to handle. They're like shortcuts for those common but computationally intensive operations.
Okay, so developers can use these precompiles to do certain things faster and more efficiently.
You got it. And the cool thing is, WeaveVM has created the first ever precompiles that allow Solidity smart contracts to communicate directly with Arweave.
So no more workarounds or complex systems.
Yeah.
Developers can just use these precompiles to talk to Arweave as if it were part of the EVM.
That's the idea. It opens up a whole new world of possibilities for building dApps that leverage the power of permanent storage.
I'm loving it. So get into the details for me. How many of these precompiles have they made and what do they do?
So they've implemented two main precompiles, one for writing data to Arweave and another for reading data from it. The first one, which lives at address 0 by 17, lets developers send data straight to Arweave from their Solidity smart contracts. All they got to do is hand over the data and a wallet address, and the precompile handles everything else.
It's like having a built-in save button for Arweave right there in their smart contract.
Exactly. And the second precompile, at address 0 by 18, lets smart contracts pull data from Arweave through a really simple interface. Just give it the Arweave transaction ID for the data you want, and it takes care of fetching it and delivering it to your smart contract.
So it's like a built-in load button for Arweave. They've made it so easy to use Arweave, it's almost like it's a native part of the EVM.
That's exactly what they were going for. And what's really impressive is how flexible and developer-friendly they made these precompiles.
Okay, I'm curious, what do you mean by flexible? How have they made it easier for developers to use these things?
Well, for example, with the read precompile, developers can choose which Arweave gateway they want to use to get their data.
Okay.
So they have control over how reliable and fast their applications are. And if they don't specify a gateway, it just defaults to the most popular one, arweave.net. It's super easy to get started.
So they've got both power and simplicity covered.
Nice. Exactly. It's a great example of how they've designed this for both experienced developers and those who are just starting out with WeaveVM.
I like it. Now, paint me a picture here. What kind of applications can we build now that we have this direct link to Arweave?
Well, imagine building apps with tons of content, like videos, pictures, documents, all stored permanently on Arweave. Well, the app's logic and user interface are handled by those familiar Solidity smart contracts running on WeaveVM.
It's like combining the best of both worlds. The security of Arweave and the flexibility of the EVM. We're talking about a truly decentralized and censorship-resistant internet.
You got it. Or think about what this means for NFTs. With WeaveVM's precompiles, we can finally store the actual data and assets tied to an NFT on Arweave instead of just that ownership certificate.
So NFTs could actually live up to their name and become truly non-fungible with all their data safe and sound forever.
Exactly. No more worrying about centralized servers crashing or your precious digital assets vanishing into thin air. WeaveVM lays the foundation for an internet where you truly own your stuff.
This is awesome. And I hear these precompiles are already being used in real projects, right?
Oh yeah, they're playing a crucial role in how WeaveVM and KYVE are hooking up. KYVE is this decentralized data lake built on Arweave.
Right, KYVE. They're all about creating a super reliable way to store and retrieve data from different blockchains.
Exactly. And by integrating KYVE's API into WeaveVM, smart contracts can now tap into this massive amount of blockchain data that's permanently stored on Arweave.
So it's like having a direct line to a giant decentralized data warehouse right from your Solidity code.
That's the idea. It opens up a ton of possibilities for building data-driven dApps.
It does. This is amazing. It's another example of how WeaveVM isn't just doing its own thing. They're working with other projects to create this like web of decentralized tools and services that developers can use.
Exactly. It's all about building a richer, more interconnected ecosystem.
I'm all for it. Now, what about that operator as XX thing they're doing with data availability?
Oh, yeah, that's a really cool development. They're using EigenLayer, which is this protocol that lets people restake their ETH or LSTs to provide security for different decentralized services.
So instead of just using their own network of nodes for data availability, they can tap into EigenLayer's validator network. That's pretty clever.
It is. It's a way to make their system even more robust and resilient.
So how does this operator as XX concept actually work?
They've created this XX that acts as an operator for an EigenLayer AVS, one of their actively validated services. And this XX can be plugged into any Roth-based client, which lets it use the security of EigenLayer's validator network.
It's like a bridge between these two powerful ecosystems,
Yeah.
letting them work together seamlessly.
Exactly. It's another example of how they're always looking for ways to integrate with other cool projects and make their own system even better.
They're clearly not just building a platform. They're working hard to.
They're working hard to make WeaveVM a core part of this much bigger, more interconnected, decentralized world.
Yeah.
It's like they're weaving this intricate web, if you will.
I like that analogy. They're definitely weaving something special. You know, it strikes me that what WeaveVM is doing is really getting back to the original spirit of blockchain technology.
Oh yeah, how so?
Well, think about it. Blockchain was always supposed to be about decentralization, permanence, and trustless verification, right?
Yeah.
But somewhere along the way, I feel like we started losing sight of those core principles.
I see what you mean. We got so focused on speed and scalability that sometimes those fundamental values got left behind.
Exactly. We started seeing those centralized solutions creeping back in, relying on third-party data providers and all these custodial services. And don't even get me started on those crazy gas fees on some chains. It's become impossible for many people to even participate.
Yeah, that's a real problem. But I think WeaveVM is trying to bring us back to those core values. They're proving that we can have both high performance and keep things decentralized, permanent, and affordable.
And they're not just talking about it, they're actually doing it.
Yeah.
This is real technology being used by real projects.
Exactly. It's a glimpse of a future where the internet is truly owned by the people, not by some giant corporation or government.
Okay, I'm sold on the vision, but I have to admit, I'm still a little fuzzy on how this whole lazy evaluation thing works.
Ah, yes, lazy evaluation. That's a key part of how they achieve such incredible performance and keep those costs down.
Can you break it down for me in simple terms? What does it actually mean for WeaveVM?
Okay, imagine you've got this massive spreadsheet, like millions of cells, and every time you change just one cell, you have to recalculate everything else. That would take forever, right?
Yeah, that sounds super inefficient.
It is, and that's how most blockchains work. But with lazy evaluation, you only recalculate the stuff that's actually affected by the change. Everything else just stays the same until you need it.
So it's all about optimizing the calculations and only doing the work that's absolutely necessary.
Exactly. And that makes a huge difference in terms of both scalability and cost.
I can see how it would reduce the load on the network, but how does it affect costs?
Well, remember how expensive it is to store data on most blockchains? With lazy evaluation, they only store the bare minimum needed to verify the state of the blockchain. Everything else is calculated on demand. It's like having this enormous library, but you only borrow the books you actually need to read instead of keeping every single book on your shelf.
I love that analogy. So much more efficient.
It is. It's all about optimizing where you store the data and when you process it. And that means lower costs for users because they're not paying to store and process data they're not using.
And they can do all this while still maintaining the security and verifiability of the blockchain.
That's the key. They've designed the system so that every calculation can still be checked, even though it's not done in real time.
So it's still a trustless system, even though it's not constantly crunching numbers and updating everything. Okay, I think I'm getting it. Lazy evaluation is definitely a game changer for blockchain.
It is, and it's just one of the many ways WeaveVM is pushing the limits of what's possible.
It seems like they're constantly innovating, announcing new partnerships, and making these technical breakthroughs. They're definitely one to watch.
They're not slowing down anytime soon. Their passion for building a better internet is clear in everything they do.
It's inspiring to see a team so driven by a larger purpose. It feels like a real movement, not just another tech company.
It does, doesn't it? It's about creating a better future for everyone, giving people more control over their data and their online lives.
And WeaveVM is giving them the tools to do it. Speaking of tools, we talked about how lazy evaluation and data compression help with efficiency. But how are they approaching scalability? How can they handle all this data while keeping things running smoothly?
That's a great question, and they've got a pretty interesting approach to scalability. They're combining technical innovations with strategic partnerships to make sure the system can grow without any hiccups.
So it's not just about throwing more hardware at the problem.
Nope, it's much more sophisticated than that. They designed WeaveVM to be scalable from the very beginning, and they're always looking for ways to optimize every layer of the system.
Okay, tell me more about their scalability strategy. What are they doing differently?
One of the most interesting things they're doing is using centralized block production.
Wait, centralize. I thought we were all about decentralization.
I know it sounds counterintuitive, but centralized block production doesn't have to mean sacrificing decentralization. For WeaveVM, it's a strategic move to get better throughput and performance.
Okay, I'm listening. Explain how this works.
Instead of every node on the network competing to create blocks, they have this group of special nodes called supernodes that are in charge of that job.
So not just anyone can be a block producer.
Nope. These supernodes are chosen based on their technical capabilities and how committed they are to the network's long-term health.
So they're like the A-team of block producers.
Exactly. And this makes things way more efficient because you've got these super powerful nodes handling the heavy lifting. But here's the important part. Even though block production is centralized, block validation is still completely decentralized. Anyone on the network can check the blocks created by these supernodes.
So there's still accountability built into the system.
Absolutely. It keeps things transparent and prevents those supernodes from going rogue. It's a delicate balance, but they've managed to achieve high performance without losing that core principle of decentralization.
I like it. And it seems to be working, judging by the throughput they're getting on their AlphaNet V2 testnet.
Yeah, they're running at 500 milligas, which is about 62 millibeats of data throughput, and they're hoping to push those numbers even higher on their mainnet.
That's impressive. And they're managing to do all of this while keeping storage costs super low. But how are they going to handle pricing in the long term? The cost of storage in the real world can go up and down, right?
That's a great point, and that's where their partnership with SETA comes in. Remember how we talked about SETA being their data pipeline?
Yeah, giving them access to all that data.
Well, they also play a critical role in WeaveVM's storage price oracles.
Okay, you've got my attention.
Yeah.
What are storage price oracles, and how do they fit into all of this?
So the cost of storing data on actual hard drives, in the real world, it changes over time, just like the price of anything else.
It's supply and demand, right?
Exactly. To make sure their pricing is fair and sustainable, WeaveVM needs a way to track those changes in real time. And that's where SETA's programmable oracles come in.
So they're using SETA to get a constantly updated feed on how much it costs to store data physically.
Precisely. SETA's oracles collect data from various sources, tracking the real-world cost of hard drives. And that information is used to adjust WeaveVM's storage pricing dynamically.
That's really smart. It ensures that users are always paying a fair price, and it helps keep the whole network economically stable.
Right. It's a win-win for everyone. Another example of how they're thinking ahead and building a system that's both technologically advanced and economically sound.
It seems like they've thought of everything. They're not just building cool tech. They're building a system that's designed to be used and adopted in the real world.
They're setting a new standard for blockchain projects. It's not about hype. It's about building something that actually works and can make a real difference.
Okay, I'm totally on board with their vision. But let's talk about what this means for developers. We touched on some of the benefits like the low storage costs and the fact that they can use familiar EVM tools. But what does all this mean for someone who's actually building dApps on WeaveVM? How is it changing the game for them?
It's a game changer for sure. A WeaveVM is opening up a whole new world of possibilities for building apps that were either impossible before or just way too expensive.
It's like they're taking the handcuffs off developers, letting them finally build the things they've always dreamed of.
Exactly. Those high gas fees, the limited storage, and the lack of interoperability between different systems, those were huge roadblocks for developers. It was like their creativity was being stifled. But WeaveVM is changing all that.
So how is it making life easier for developers? Give me some concrete examples.
Well, first of all, those low storage costs mean that developers can finally build data-heavy apps without worrying about going broke. Imagine creating a decentralized social network where all the content, posts, pictures, videos is permanently stored on-chain, but without those ridiculous fees you'd see on other platforms.
It's like the decentralized YouTube we've all been waiting for.
Exactly. Or think about what this could do for gaming. You could create a game where players truly own all of their in-game assets thanks to WeaveVM's permanent and affordable storage.
It's going to be amazing to see what kinds of apps emerge now that developers have this power at their fingertips.
I can't wait to see what they come up with. And it's not just about cost. They've also made it incredibly easy for developers to get started. Because it's compatible with those EVM tools that everyone's already using, developers don't have to learn a bunch of new stuff.
So if you already know Solidity and you're comfortable with the Ethereum development ecosystem, you can jump right into WeaveVM.
Exactly. It's super familiar and easy to pick up, and their documentation is fantastic, with clear guides for everything from setting up your development environment to launching your first smart contracts.
Sounds like they've really focused on making the whole developer experience smooth and enjoyable.
They have, and they're constantly engaging with the community, getting feedback, and making improvements based on what developers need.
That's so important. It shows that they're listening and that
Yeah.
they really care about building something that people will actually use.
Absolutely. And another huge benefit for developers is their commitment to interoperability. We've talked about all those partnerships with projects like MEM, AO, and KYVE.
Mhm.
Those partnerships give developers access to a whole suite of tools and services so they can build even more powerful and sophisticated dApps.
It's like they're creating this playground of decentralized tools, all accessible through WeaveVM.
That's a great way to put it. It's not just a platform, it's a gateway to a whole universe of decentralized possibilities.
And developers are at the heart of it all. They're the ones who are going to bring these possibilities to life.
Absolutely. WeaveVM is giving them the power to build those apps they've always dreamed of without any compromises.
It's an incredible time to be a blockchain developer. It feels like the tools are finally catching up to the vision.
I couldn't agree more. And WeaveVM is leading the way towards a more decentralized, equitable, and innovative future for the internet.
Okay, I have to admit, I'm feeling a little overwhelmed by all the possibilities we've discussed.
Yeah.
This is a lot to take in.
I know, right? It's a lot. But that's what makes it so exciting. We're witnessing the birth of a new paradigm, a new way of thinking about data, applications, and the internet itself.
It really feels like we're on the cusp of something truly transformative.
I believe we are, and it's all driven by those core principles: decentralization, permanence, and trustless verification. Those are the values that WeaveVM embodies, and they're the values that will guide us toward a more open, secure, and equitable internet.
So where do they see WeaveVM fitting into the broader landscape of blockchain and the internet as a whole?
Well, they've definitely thought about this a lot, and their vision is both ambitious and grounded in reality. They want WeaveVM to be the foundation for a truly decentralized and resilient internet, one that's built on permanent storage, trustless computation, and seamless interoperability between different blockchain ecosystems.
So it's not just about building a better blockchain, it's about building a better internet.
Exactly. They understand that blockchain has the power to completely change how we interact with information, with each other, and with the world around us.
It's like they're not content with just playing a small part in this transformation. They want to build the infrastructure for a whole new paradigm.
That's it. They see WeaveVM as a way to shift power away from those centralized platforms and back into the hands of individuals and communities.
It's a vision that's very much in line with the original spirit of the internet, where power was distributed and control was in the hands of the users.
Absolutely. It's about empowering people, not just recreating those centralized systems that we're trying to move away from.
And they believe that WeaveVM is the key to unlocking that potential.
They do. They see it as the missing piece, the platform that can finally provide the scalability, affordability, and permanence we need to build a truly decentralized internet.
Okay, this is all super exciting, but what about the challenges? I mean, building a system like this is incredibly complex. What are some of the obstacles they're facing, and how are they dealing with them?
You're right. Any ambitious project will have challenges. But the WeaveVM team has a great track record of overcoming obstacles and finding creative solutions. One of their biggest challenges is just the sheer complexity of what they're trying to do. Building a system like this requires a deep understanding of so many different things: blockchain, distributed systems, cryptography, economics, the list goes on.
And they're really pushing the boundaries of what's possible. They're not just iterating on existing tech. They're creating entirely new paradigms.
Exactly. There's no roadmap for this kind of innovation. They're forging their own path, which comes with risks and
And they're
uncertainties.
doing it in this crazy, fast-paced world of blockchain where everything's constantly changing.
Yeah, it's a super competitive environment, so they need to be able to adapt quickly and anticipate trends. It's not easy.
It sounds like they need to be incredibly nimble and strategic to succeed.
They do, but they've proven they can handle it. Remember when they switched from that lazy evaluated protocol to building a whole network? That was a huge change, and it shows they're not afraid to adapt and make bold moves.
They're willing to change course if they see a better way forward.
Exactly. They're driven by their vision, not by being stuck in their ways. And that's what's so exciting about them. They're not just building technology, they're building a movement.
A movement towards a more decentralized and equitable internet. And they're inviting everyone to join.
It's a powerful message, and it's resonating with people all over the world. They've managed to capture the attention of developers, investors, and everyday users. WeaveVM is a force to be reckoned with, and they're just getting started.
Okay, I think we've covered a lot of ground here. I'm starting to get a real sense of what WeaveVM is all about. It's a bold vision, backed by some seriously impressive tech and a dedicated team.
It's truly inspiring to see a project that's so aligned with the core values of decentralization and so committed to building a better future for everyone. They're in it for the long haul, and they're building something that can make a real difference in the world.
All right, so for our listeners who are maybe feeling a little overwhelmed by all this information, what are the key takeaways you'd want them to remember about WeaveVM?
I think the most important thing to understand is that WeaveVM is solving a fundamental problem that's been holding back the entire blockchain space: the problem of data storage and availability.
It's like the elephant in the room that no one else seems to be addressing effectively.
Exactly. And they're not just offering some temporary fix. They're building a whole platform that can handle massive amounts of data securely, permanently, and affordably.
And they're doing it all while staying true to those core principles of blockchain: decentralization, transparency, and security.
Absolutely. They're not sacrificing those values. They're actually making them stronger by using Arweave's permanent storage.
And they're not doing it alone. They're collaborating with all these other projects like CETA, KYVE, MEM, and AO. It's all about fostering that spirit of interoperability and innovation.
They get it. The future of blockchain is about working together, not competing against each other. It's about building a network of interconnected systems that can create something truly transformative.
And they're empowering developers to build the apps of the future, giving them the tools and infrastructure they need to unleash their creativity and build truly impactful apps.
It's such an exciting time to be involved in blockchain, and WeaveVM is at the forefront of this whole movement. They're leading the charge toward a more decentralized, equitable, and resilient internet.
They're definitely the team to watch, especially in this permanent storage space.
I agree. They've got a clear vision, the technology to back it up, and a super talented team. I have no doubt they're going to do great things.
I'm excited to see where they go next. Now, before we move on to our next deep dive, I want to shift gears for a moment and talk about the bigger picture.
Okay.
We've explored the technical details of WeaveVM, their partnerships, their vision for the future, but I'm curious about their potential impact on the internet as a whole. What kind of future could they help create?
That's where it gets really interesting. We've talked about how WeaveVM is changing the game for blockchain, but its implications go way beyond that. It could change the entire internet.
So paint me a picture. What could a WeaveVM-powered internet look like?
Imagine a world where we don't have to rely on those giant platforms like Google, Facebook, or Amazon to store our data, connect with each other, or access information. Imagine an internet where data is permanent, where we can trust the computations happening behind the scenes, and where control is shifted back to individuals and communities.
That's a radical departure from the internet we have now, where so much of our data is controlled by just a handful of powerful corporations.
It is. But it's a change we need to make. We've all seen the problems with this centralized model: data breaches, privacy violations, censorship. It's not working.
Yeah, we definitely need a better way.
And that's what WeaveVM offers, a real alternative. It's proving that a decentralized internet isn't just a dream, it can be a reality.
So instead of relying on these centralized servers and platforms, we can have this network of interconnected nodes, all powered by WeaveVM, storing and processing our data securely, transparently, and accountably.
Exactly. It's a completely different way of thinking about the internet.
And it's not just theoretical. WeaveVM is already laying the groundwork for this vision with their work on permanent ledger archiving and their partnerships with SATA and KYV.
They're building the infrastructure for a new internet, one that's owned by the people, not by corporations or governments. It's a bold goal, but they're making real progress.
It's a vision that I think a lot of people can get behind. But let's bring it down to earth for a second. How could this impact everyday life? What would a WeaveVM-powered internet actually look like for the average person?
Well, for one thing, we could finally have true ownership of our data.
Boy.
Instead of giving all our personal information to these big tech companies who might not have our best interests at heart, we could store it securely and permanently on Arweave, and only we, or the people we choose, could access it.
That would be huge for privacy. No more data breaches or companies selling our data without our permission.
Exactly. And it goes beyond just our personal data. We could have more control over our financial records, our medical information, our creative work, even our identities. It's about taking back control of our digital lives.
It's about empowering people to manage their own data on their own terms.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And that has huge implications for free speech, economic empowerment, and social justice. It's not just about technology, it's about creating a more fair and just society.
Wow. WeaveVM is a tool for social change. That's powerful.
It is. It's about leveling the playing field and giving everyone equal access to information and opportunity.
I love that vision. It's definitely something worth fighting for.
And the WeaveVM team is leading the way. They're not just building technology, they're building a movement.
A movement towards a better internet, a better future.
Yeah.
And they're welcoming everyone to join them.
It's an exciting time to be alive. The future of the internet is being shaped right now, and WeaveVM is at the forefront of this revolution.
It all comes back to that simple but powerful idea of permanent storage.
It does. It's the foundation for trust, accountability, and freedom in a decentralized world.
Without permanence, we're just rebuilding those same centralized systems we're trying to escape.
Exactly. WeaveVM is proving that another way is possible, a way to build a more resilient, equitable, and user-centric internet.
I'm really excited to see how this all plays out. It has the potential to be truly groundbreaking.
Me too. The future is decentralized, and WeaveVM is leading the way.
Okay, that was an incredible deep dive into WeaveVM. My head is spinning with all this information.
It's a lot to take in, for sure. But it's important to understand what they're building. It's revolutionary.
So for our listeners who might be feeling a bit overwhelmed, what's the one thing you'd want them to remember about WeaveVM?
I would say this. WeaveVM is more than just another blockchain project. It's a movement, a vision for a better future, a vision of a decentralized internet where power is shared and users are in control.
And they're backing up that vision with some seriously impressive technology and a commitment to those core principles of decentralization.
They are. They're definitely a team to keep your eye on.
Well said. Okay, before we move on to our next deep dive, I have one last question for you.
Shoot.
We have explored WeaveVM from every angle. The tech, the team, their vision. But what about you? What aspect of WeaveVM do you personally find most compelling?
That's a tough one. There are so many things to admire about their approach. But if I had to choose just one, I think it would be their dedication to building a truly decentralized internet. It's not just a buzzword for them, it's a fundamental value that guides everything they do.
It's inspiring to see a team that's so in tune with the original spirit of the internet.
Yeah,
Open, accessible, and controlled by the users.
exactly. And they're not just talking about it, they're actually creating the tools and infrastructure to make it happen. And they're doing it in this open, collaborative way, inviting everyone to join them on this journey.
That's what makes it feel like a real movement, not just a company trying to sell something.
I agree. That's what gives me hope for the future of the internet. WeaveVM is showing that a different path is possible.
That's a beautiful sentiment. It reminds us that technology is never neutral. It always reflects the values of the people who create it. And in WeaveVM's case, those values are aligned with a more decentralized, equitable, and empowering future for everyone. Okay, so before we wrap things up completely, one last thought. What about the future of WeaveVM? They seem to be on the right track, but what are those big unanswered questions? What should our listeners be thinking about as they explore this space?
That's a great question. WeaveVM is still a relatively new project, so there's a lot we don't know yet about how it will evolve and what its impact will be, but there are definitely some big questions worth considering.
Okay, what are some key things our listeners should be thinking about as they delve deeper into WeaveVM?
Well, I think one of the biggest questions is how they'll handle governance. Every decentralized system needs a way to make decisions and evolve over time.
Right, you can't just set it and forget it.
Exactly. And with WeaveVM's unique approach to block production, relying on those supernodes, the question becomes, how do they ensure that those supernodes don't become too powerful? How do they keep the system truly decentralized?
It's that balancing act between efficiency and decentralization again.
Precisely. They're going to need to develop a governance model that's transparent, accountable, and truly responsive to the community. It's something that a lot of blockchain projects are struggling with, and there's no easy answer.
Right, it's one of the big challenges in the world of decentralization. To how do you govern a system that's designed to be permissionless and trustless?
Exactly. But I think the WeaveVM team is up to the challenge. They've shown they're capable of thinking creatively and finding solutions to complex problems. They're not afraid to tackle the tough stuff.
That's good to hear. Another question that comes to mind is, how will WeaveVM integrate with the rest of the internet?
Ah, yes, bridging the gap between those two worlds. Right now, blockchain feels like its own separate thing with its own unique technologies and protocols.
Like a parallel internet running alongside the one we use every day.
Exactly. And if WeaveVM wants to truly revolutionize the internet, it can't just stay in its own little bubble. It needs to figure out how to connect with the existing internet infrastructure.
It's about making it accessible and user-friendly for everyone, even those who aren't deep into blockchain.
You got it. They need to figure out how to make WeaveVM work seamlessly with all those internet protocols and applications we use every day. And that will require collaborating with a lot of different people: internet service providers, software developers, policymakers. Everyone needs to be involved.
It's a massive task, but the potential payoff is huge. Imagine a future where the principles of blockchain are baked into the internet itself.
Wow, that would be amazing. It could fundamentally change how we use the internet.
I'm also really curious about what kind of new applications and use cases we might see that we haven't even thought of yet. Feels like we're just scratching the surface with this technology.
It's like trying to predict the future of the internet back in the early 90s, before the web even existed.
Right. We had no idea what was coming. And I think the same thing is true for WeaveVM. It could lead to a wave of innovation that completely changes how we live, work, and interact with the world.
Yeah.
What new ways will we find to communicate, collaborate, and do business? What problems will we solve that we can't even imagine yet? It's exciting and a little scary at the same time.
It is. The possibilities are endless, and that's what makes this such an incredible time to be alive. We're at the very beginning of something new, and WeaveVM is leading the way. It is. It's like we're standing at the edge of this vast, uncharted territory, And the possibilities just seem endless.
It really does feel like we're on the verge of a whole new era for the internet. WeaveVM is definitely one to watch as they try to pull all these pieces together.
I couldn't agree more. We've dug into so many details, but it's amazing to think about what we don't know yet, right? Yeah. What will WeaveVM make possible that we can't even imagine today?
That's what makes this whole space so fascinating.
Yeah.
But before we get too lost in those future possibilities, I do have one final question for you. So we've talked about the tech, the team, the vision, but I'm curious, what aspect of WeaveVM really stands out to you personally? What makes it so compelling?
That's a tough one. They've got such a great approach. There's so much to admire. But I think what really grabs me is their dedication to building a truly decentralized internet. It's not just a trendy slogan for them. It's a core belief that shapes everything they do.
I agree. It's refreshing to see a team so in tune with that original spirit of the internet, open, accessible, and controlled by the users, not by those giant corporations.
Right. And they're not just talking about it, they're actually building the tools and the infrastructure to make it happen. And they're not trying to do it all on their own either. They're inviting everyone to join them, to build alongside them.
That open approach is what makes it feel like a real movement, not just some company trying to sell a product.
Exactly. And that's what gives me so much hope for the future of the internet. WeaveVM is showing us that there's another way, a better way.
It's a powerful message, and it reminds us that technology is never neutral. It's a reflection of the values of the people who create it. And with WeaveVM, those values seem to be aligned with a more equitable, empowering future for everyone online.
Well said. But of course, it's not all perfect. There are still challenges ahead, things we need to figure out.
Right. Every revolution has its bumps in the road. What are some of the big unanswered questions about WeaveVM? What should our listeners be thinking about as they explore this space further?
Well, one of the most critical things to consider, I think, is how WeaveVM is going to deal with governance. Any decentralized system, no matter how well it's designed, needs a way to make decisions and adapt over time.
It can't just run on autopilot forever.
Exactly. And with WeaveVM's unique setup with those supernodes handling block production, the question becomes, how do they make sure those supernodes don't get too much power? How do they make sure the system stays truly decentralized?
It's that tension between efficiency and decentralization again.
Exactly. They're going to need a governance model that's transparent, accountable, and really responsive to the community's needs. It's a challenge that a lot of blockchain projects are facing. And there's no one-size-fits-all solution.
So it's an ongoing experiment, something our listeners should keep an eye on as things develop.
For sure. Another big question is how WeaveVM is going to integrate with the rest of the internet. Right now, blockchain feels like its own separate world with its own rules and protocols.
Almost like a parallel internet running alongside the one we use every day.
Right. And if WeaveVM really wants to change the internet as we know it, it can't stay isolated forever. It needs to find ways to bridge that gap to connect with the existing internet infrastructure.
So it's not just about building cool tech, it's about making sure that tech is accessible and usable for everyone, even people who aren't deep into blockchain.
That's it. They need to figure out how to make WeaveVM work smoothly with the internet protocols and applications we all use every day. And that means working with a lot of different groups like internet service providers, software developers, policymakers. Everyone needs to be on board.
It's a huge undertaking, but if they can pull it off, the potential rewards are massive.
Yeah.
Imagine a world where those decentralized principles of blockchain are woven into the very fabric of the internet.
It would be incredible. But even beyond those big challenges, there's another question that I keep coming back to. If WeaveVM really takes off, what will that unlock? What kind of applications and use cases will emerge that we can't even imagine right now?
It's like we're just at the very beginning of this whole thing, like trying to explain social media or streaming video to someone back in the early days of the internet.
Exactly. They wouldn't have had a clue what you were talking about.
Back then, those applications didn't even exist. It makes you wonder what incredible things people will create once WeaveVM becomes that base layer for a decentralized web.
I know, right? What new forms of communication, collaboration, maybe even new ways of doing business will emerge? What problems will we be able to solve that we haven't even encountered yet? It's pretty mind-blowing to think about.
It really is. Well, I think that's a perfect note to end on. A sense of wonder at the possibilities, but also a realistic understanding of the challenges that lie ahead.
Couldn't said it better myself.
All right, so that wraps up this episode of The Deep Dive. A huge thanks to you for joining us on this exploration of WeaveVM. It's been a fascinating journey.
It's been a pleasure.
And for our listeners, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep diving deep into this world of decentralization. You never know what you might find.